Welcome viewers, I'm Vivat Veritas and welcome to
Deltarune December.
That's right, we're going straight into the intro. I've made it a mission for myself to really push my process to its limit, see if I can manage to put out a video every week of December, and we're all going to see together whether or not that's something I'm actually capable of doing. Who knows, maybe this will become a repeating thing, we'll see. The plan is that each week we'll look at a different Lightner and do a bit of fancy character analysis on them. Unlike most of my other videos, there isn't really a big picture or point to it, not that I end up answering a question in them anyway. It's more just to have a good idea about the particular characters and demonstrate my own personal opinions, and we'll likely tie it into a couple of the classic big themes that we've thoroughly established within Deltarune by now. So, who are we going to start with? Well, there is a pretty great candidate right off the bat. Kris Dreemurr, I think, is the most important character in Deltarune, and I feel like this isn't a controversial opinion. Would it be out of place then to not talk about them when discussing who I believe to be the key 4 Lightners, or at least the 4 Lightners we know much about? There is a slight problem though. I've already done this. Twice. So what new information can I bring to the table to make this video worth your time? Well, I think something that I've kind of avoided talking about is Kris's relations to the other characters, and getting an idea of the type of person that Kris actually, well, is. Finally, it's time for a true character analysis on our favourite chocolate-eating, TV unplugging, non-binary, not-so-blank slate protagonist. No other protagonism-afflicted children allowed. Join me, won't you? Of course, I have talked about Kris's case of protagonism on this channel in the past, and how that intersects with the erasing of their identity. I've developed a couple of conclusions from this, but the main takeaway is that Deltarune cares about commenting on autonomy and freedom. I've explored how Kris feels about this, likely bad, but we should also consider how Kris feels about, well, stuff in general. This is a character analysis, it's kind of the point. Kris is showcased time and time again as someone who lives in the outskirts. They don't socialize, they don't do extracurriculars, and they barely even go outside when Asriel isn't involved. However, they don't exactly blend into society either. Kris actively takes themselves out of society as much as they can, even before we arrived, though how much of this was their decision or enforced upon them as the only human in the town is up for debate. They're considered somewhat of an outcast, a weird kid for this, and this is partly due to them being cloaked in shadow, a metaphorical shadow that is, though their fringe obscuring their face is a literal example. The most notable form of this being shown visually is, conveniently, the first thing we see when we control Kris. Kris's room says a lot about themselves and the world that they live in. On one side we have Asriel's domain, filled with trophies and accolades. The stars are bright over here compared to Kris's side, which is completely devoid of, well, anything really. Nothing over here has anything to comment on regarding Kris's personality, accomplishments, or identity. It's like a ghost lives here, barely existing compared to the shining light of their brother. The palpable sense of darkness in this room, Kris living in the shadow of Asriel, is reinforced repeatedly in Hometown. Almost anyone who Kris talks to in the light world mentions Asriel, whether it's Father Alvin, Rudy, Catty, the bartender. No matter who, Kris and Asriel are seen as a duo. That makes sense, they are siblings, but the difference is that people know things about Asriel. Kris is just kind of mysterious, like the shadow of their older brother. A quiet kid that no one really disliked, but also no one really knew how to deal with. The interesting thing about this is that Kris doesn't really seem to mind that much, at least about being in Asriel's shadow. Kris clearly is very fond of Asriel, so I'm sure part of it is just normal sibling things, but it's no secret that Kris truly admires Asriel. The trick is that I would imagine part of this is due to the nostalgia of their family unit. When Kris and Asriel were kids, their parents were married, Rudy was healthy, and Des was still around. With Asriel at college and Kris alone now, they are holding on to that relationship with Asriel more than anything. They're resigning themselves to living with the idea of Asriel constantly towering over them, an impossible goal and desire that is made all the more tragic when you consider that the pace is moving so quickly in Hometown regarding Dark Worlds that there might not even be somewhere for Asriel to come back to if this keeps up. Asriel should be an anchor for Kris, yes, but the as so far one-sided connection they have only serves to tie Kris into others rather than becoming their own person. It's no coincidence then that Kris seems to particularly enjoy the Dark Worlds. As a kid who lives in the shadows, outcast from society willingly or not, this is the perfect place to escape to, as if they were meant to be here this whole time. The perfect attribute to have as the protagonist of this specific game. Convenient, huh? Kris finds new relationships with those in the Dark Worlds, but the most salient of these is Ralsei. I think I've made the connections between Kris and Asriel clear so far, so it's no surprise that the relationship these two have is slightly fraught. Instead of Kris projecting or being unhealthily connected to Asriel, though, the roles are reversed. In this case, Ralsei is the one who is deeply associated with Kris, and it's not completely clear how okay Kris is with it. I talked about this relationship a lot in my Ralsei video, but let's see what it actually means for Kris. There is obviously a strong tonal undercurrent to it all, with Ralsei most likely resembling the very brother Kris so cherishes and has been longing to see again. The brother that is a reminder of the good times of safety and fun and peace, but this is uncanny in a way. Although we are given the option to express affection for Ralsei in numerous ways, that's always our choice. The things that we don't choose, the things that Kris forces to happen, are where their true feelings lie, I would say. The main point in regards to Ralsei is something I mentioned a long time ago, the way that Kris decides to express your choice of inviting Ralsei. There is a strong sense of confusion in their voice, as if Kris themselves is surprised at your choice and isn't exactly sure where this is coming from. Part of this may be the implied romantic undercurrent at times that unnerves Kris, but they don't express aggression or annoyance, just confusion. This is a facsimile of their brother, yes, but I think it's not out of the question to consider that Kris's complex feelings towards Ralsei, a relationship that we are likely missing some pieces from due to the times he talks with Kris outside our purview, could also be considered as Kris trying to see Ralsei outside of this weird approximation of Asriel. After all, this is using some slight meta-knowledge, but it's not like Ralsei acts much like the Asriel we know. Aside from appearance and name, this could be a completely different character than Kris is used to. Honestly, I think the relationship between Kris and Ralsei is one of the most important parts of the game, both for Kris's character as well as the thematics of nostalgia and identity, but there's a lot more information we need to truly understand it. Asriel, of course, isn't the only Lightner that Kris has a relationship with. I'm hesitant to talk much about their relationship with Susie and Noelle, as it's probably best to save that for their respective upcoming videos. However, I do think it's important to mention what the relationships actually mean for Kris. Ultimately, Kris hasn't really had friends in the Light World until we showed up. They go back pretty far with Noelle, but it seems like the owning of friendship points has been at an all-time low for a while at least. From what the game tells us, it's pretty obvious that this ties into Kris's general isolation from the rest of society, cutting themselves off from other people, likely after the disappearance of Des and their parents' divorce, especially for Noelle. Susie, though, was someone they never got a chance to befriend up until now, and it's unlikely they would've on their own accord. Instead, through random chance, Kris and Susie grew to understand each other more and more, and although it's a little cliche, they realize that they have some similarities that they can bond over. This friendship with Susie gives Kris something new to care about, and although it does eventuate due to our meddling, they are pretty alright with it as far as things we do go. Even their relationship with Noelle, provided no snow grapefruit, improves, which seems to be for Kris's betterment. None of them carry the same tone from Kris or the game as their relationship with Ralsei does, which leads me to believe that Kris does appreciate and enjoy these connections being made, even if they have odd ways of showing it. Kris has odd ways of showing and not showing a lot of things, to be honest. The thing that I want to stress the most about Kris, and the thing that colours my analysis of them, is this. I really do believe that Kris is just a frightened, upset kid with a lot of emotional turmoil. I think everything I've gone over in both this channel and video makes that clear. In our society, where most of us can't cast magic or open up dark fountains, we have our own ways of managing these kinds of things. I know when I was a kid, I focused my will into terrible Instagram posts and edgy vent art since I hadn't yet developed the ability to make fiction diegetic in the world. Kris lives in an entirely different society, and so may express themselves differently. I do genuinely think that it is outside the scope that some people have, that a kid can just do this without having to be possessed by the devil from the Bible or be completely soulless. Sure, cutting the tires of your mum's car for ambiguous purposes is not a great thing to do, but when you've got the type of life that Kris has, I can't really blame them. They are just a kid. I think if they were ontologically evil or something, they would have been a lot more okay with the Snowgrave route happening as it did, whereas instead we see them desperately try to stop us however little they can. At the end of the day, Kris is a kid shadowed by their older brother, the situation of their life out of their control, and by society as a whole. They seek to either embrace those shadows or break free of them using their friendship and potentially the very power that we lend them. And although they might do some morally grey actions as far as being a teenager goes, they're really just a kid who is dealing with a lot of complex emotions that they aren't quite equipped to deal with or ready to confront. Kris is the linchpin to the entire thematic weight of Deltarune, and I'm sure that we will see and uncover much more about the environment that has made Kris the person they are today, and the situations that they forge a new path with. And that's a wrap on week 1 of Deltarune December. Thanks for watching. I love Kris so much, so I'll jump at any excuse to talk about them, even for the 3rd time. Next week we'll be taking a look at Susie, which I'm really excited for, as she was second in the poll that ended up leading to the Ralsei character analysis, so it's time to give her the flowers she deserves. Hopefully she doesn't eat them. Anyway, let me know what you thought about the video, and about Kris as a whole. I'm pretty pleased with how it turned out over a relatively short time frame, but I'm always keen to hear feedback, good or bad. An exuberant thank you to my extraordinary patrons Michael Bates, Meggie, Zalgo, Tybee Fitzhugh, and Nigel Robinson, who keep me in the business of YouTube. Feel free to check out said Patreon to help support me, and maybe convince me to do more regular uploads. Until next time, I've been Vivet Veritas, and I'll see you again soon.